No matter how flash the hospital is, it's fucking depressing. They're so damn clinical and stark. It's something about how everything is sterilized and no one knows how to decorate with anything that isn't white or pale blue. I've spent plenty of time in medbays and field hospitals. They had more personality than this place, and the staff had a better sense of humour too. The thing was, I had the doctors worried. After the mental assault I had suffered and being in the coma for 2 weeks, they wanted to keep me in for observation, make sure there wasn't a ticking time bomb, metaphorically speaking, inside my head. I get it, a Cypher's mind is an interesting thing, how it copes with situations and adapts, how we're in tune with energy and magic, so apparently I'm worth a study or two. Enter Ulf the lab rat. In town 1 week, come see the freak. $2. Still, it could be worse. I could be out cold. I could be having an argument with a ghost. The whole event had left me more shaken than what had happened to me at the party. I still couldn't decide if what I had seen was just a dream or if it was real. It seemed so vivid, so tactile. What had Dad said? It's a skill most of us don't discover until it's too late. What did that even mean? It was a comment like that that made me think maybe, just maybe, there was something more to this than just a dream. Or maybe I was pulling riddles out of my ass. Either way, the whole incident had made me uneasy. I had awoken from the coma the day before. Reva had sat with me for the last 2 weeks. Fia had been in and out when she felt she could make it. Apparently, she had had a bit of a stomachache for a couple of days after the party. Probably the chunks of helmet she had swallowed along with his head. Lucky for her, a Lycan's improved physiology meant that she could actually eat almost anything and digest it. I once saw her eat a tin can on a dare. She said it hurt going down, but she felt fine by the next day. Sierra, with her connections to the hospital, had made sure Reva had a bed to sleep in next to me. And she made full use of it, not knowing how long I would be like that. She had set up shop in here. Not that she had much to tow along with her, although I had been noticing additional clothing accumulating in our part of the apartment. I was pretty sure that stuff hadn't been there when she'd moved in. They say that people in comas can hear those around them. I hadn't been able to hear her, but then I had been a bit preoccupied. Reva said she hadn't been able to hear my thoughts at all. She had talked to me, constantly, filling me in on what had happened and just talking shit. If I had been able to hear it, I'd forgotten it all. My mind was exhausted, almost as much as my body. No wonder I'd been out cold for so long. So, we had done our job, survived to see the sun rise, and we'd all come out of it alive and not in cuffs. That was something, right? Between the three of us, Fia included, we had been branded heroes. Reva had said that there was reporters trying to get in to see me, but the security at the hospital had been pretty tight. I didn't know what they intended to get out of a coma patient though. If I was being honest, that made me a bit uneasy too. I wasn't a fan of notoriety. I was used to keeping low profile. They hadn't tried to harass Fia though. Not since one guy tried to follow her back to the apartment and she let herself go just enough to scare him. To be fair, she didn't know he was a reporter. She thought he was just some creep. Same thing in my opinion. I also felt somewhat at a loose end due to the abrupt end of our struggle against the stranger. It was too similar to the first time when I thought he had died. At least this time I was sure. A werewolf eating your brain was pretty final. There was a lot of questions left unanswered though, like who the hell was he, where had he come from, what was this patron he'd spoken of, and did they give him the little black book? Fia had unfortunately cut those leads short when she ate his head from the inside out. I wasn't mad about it, just a bit disappointed. I'd hoped to get a look at his face before the end. A small part of me was holding out hope that it wasn't the end of the line. A large part of me knew that was wishful thinking. There was the case of the missing explosives that had gone unaccounted for as well, but the cops were all over that, with detection drones sweeping the city. They would find them eventually, even if it took them months. That much high explosive can't hide forever. Still, call it a win over all. Sierra had come to visit me after I woke up. She had thanked me and showered myself and Reva with praise. This was all well and good, but deep down, I felt like it was all too late. The damage was done. People had died. Thousands of people. Homes and businesses were destroyed. The city was in pandemonium. There was no going back. For all her boasting about rebuilding the city and making it a better place, I knew that the other ruling members of the corps weren't exactly going to let opportunities like this slip through their fingers. There was money to be made here, somehow. They would squeeze out every cent. I could hear the maddened speech of the stranger in my mind, and that part of me, to my shame, agreed with him. He had been insane, I assumed, but he had been right. The city needed to be cleaned up. The rich were the problem, and there was nothing I or anyone else could do about it. Lining them up and gunning them down wouldn't solve anything. There was always someone waiting in the wings to fill in dead men's shoes. I had done what I set out to do, though, and I was rewarded with my usual wage from the department and a generous payday from Sierra. Sierra didn't actually have to pay me. I drew a paycheck from the Department of Federal Hunters. Private paychecks were just an incentive to get hunters to do jobs that didn't have federal bounties attached. However, she had promised me an incentive and she delivered on her word, with a very generous chunk of money that filled my account to the brim. Probably not even a dent in her funds, but I wasn't going to complain. Damn, I had never seen that much money before. Maybe Reva and I could take the chance to hop onto a private yacht for a few days. Fia could hit up a VR resort somewhere. I hadn't sailed in years. I missed it, and Fia had always wanted to try one of the big lavish VR places inland. After all, we weren't just paid up, we were wrapped up. I had money to burn, the job was done, high fives all round. Go team. I still wasn't getting matching jackets though. My delusions of taking some time off lasted all of my last day in hospital. After a final checkup and some tests, I was discharged and foolishly reconnected to my comms channels. That was a dumbass move. Reva was driving us back to the apartment. I was still feeling pretty messy if I was being honest, but I put that part of me down to being lethargic from too much bed rest. Now, I'm one of those guys that does feel a compulsion towards helping a friend in need. Reva had even said as much, as she'd put it, even when they didn't deserve it. Even if they weren't really a friend. That's why, when I did reconnect my comms, I got a barrage of messages and missed calls. Then, when I saw who they were from, my heart sank and my anxiety jumped in equal measures. It was Hercule, the orc hunter from the East Coast that I'd met on the train the same night I had met Reva. Now, we weren't exactly friends. Professional acquaintances was more accurate. But he had cut me in on the pay for that job, and he hadn't sold me out when it came to the sabotage I'd done to the wand that he'd been sent to recover. I felt I owed him a favour or two. That was my reasoning, and I was sticking to it. The first message was along the lines of, "Hi, I'm heading west, could use a hand on a job if you're free." The next couple were details and a location. The last, though, was after the missed calls. It simply read, "Call ASAP." Well, shit. Reva was always in my thoughts, but she did try and pretend occasionally for the sake of normality. "What's wrong? You've gone all silent." "You remember that orc hunter from the train?" "Not really. You were inside my head most of the time." That was true. She hadn't actually met him. I had been puppeting her through the entire interaction. Oops. Oh yeah, well, anyway. She gave me a level look out of the corner of her eye, and then a cheeky grin that told me we were past hard feelings on the topic. Well, anyway, looks like he's over here for a job. He needs a hand. "Whereabouts?" she asked while taking the off-ramp to the city centre. I checked the location again. Wow, right out in the sticks. I searched it up on my maps. North and inland a bit. It's a new town, relatively speaking. Not even really a town. It's built up to service the weather control station nearby. Terraforming the large tracts of dry and desolate land inland had been a huge undertaking by the government, and they'd been backed by some big corps. The downside was that the corps now had shares in the terraforming stations. They called the shots, they set up the work, they paid the bills. They were the ones that got the government kickbacks, the fat cats at the top, not the hard-working diggers at the bottom of the ladder. I'm gonna call him, I said as I hit dial. It rang out. Not a good sign. He might just be busy, Reva offered as I frowned into traffic. I don't know. Doesn't feel right. I could tell she was skeptical, but she didn't want to push it. I thought it was a problem. It was important to me. It was enough to make it important to her. I called ahead to Fia, filled her in and asked her to start collecting all the info on the area in question. When we got back to the old tourist trap of an alley that was the access to my apartment, I saw there was a few reporters hanging around at the front entrance. Great. Someone at the hospital must have put out the word that I'd left. Either that or they'd camped outside. I wouldn't put it past them. Journalists were bloodsuckers that gave vamps a bad name. We ended up hiding in the crowd and sneaking in via Mrs. Chen's spice shop, which actually had a private back door into the apartment block. By the time we got upstairs, Fia had dug up all the public info on the little work town and some of the less public stuff too. The town that had been cobbled together for the workers was called Site 43. Creative, right? Like I said, these places were built by the corps. They didn't give a shit if the place had an identity, as long as it was making them money. Reva and I began to throw together a bag each, while Fia collated a file for me to read on the ride out. It was going to be a long drive, several hours at least. Are you sure you're up to this? Fia asked skeptically. She was leaning on the doorframe to our room, as Reva and I sorted out the essentials that we could fit in a duffel bag each. I like to travel light, less to pack if you need to make tracks in a hurry. I didn't look up from my packing. What do you mean, I'm fine? There was a silence that made me look up. Reva was sharing a look with Fia. What? Reva shrugged and went back to packing. You did just come out of a coma a few days ago. I'm fine, really, fit as a fiddle. Merahahahoy, Reva muttered in what I could only assume was Asiatic Elvish, given that Fia spoke it too. Lakahol sheharaha mato, Fia replied. Do you mind? The silence this time was embarrassed. Fia broke it. We just don't want you overextending yourself too soon. You don't even really know the guy, Reva said placatingly. Call it a professional interest then. That gave me a thought. If this was a government site, sort of, maybe this was a department-issued job. I should call Rio, I said, opening up the trunk at the foot of my bed that held the small arsenal of weapons. I'll do it, Fia called over her shoulder as she walked back to her screen array. You get some sleep in the car. I'll have it all sorted by the time you get there. I began to load a hard-covered padded case, a spare pistol, a couple of med packs, some seal and squeal, some emergency rations. They tasted like cardboard, they looked like shit, but they were protein. I just had no idea what we were heading into. It couldn't be worse than the garden, though. That had been the first time I'd gone on a mission in ages. Well, sure, I'd done some trips out of the city, obviously, but they were usually just very clean cut. I was just following a trail, I knew the target. The trip to the Reaper's Garden had been very spur of the moment, though. I had next to no info to go on, I hadn't been prepared, and I sure as hell made a sloppy job of it. I had stocked up on a few things in the meantime. My second outing was going to go more smoothly with any luck. My hand lingered over my sword, its blade fully retracted into the hilt. I cleaned it and checked it over. It still operated as good as new, despite what it had been through. I snatched it up and tucked it into the case, then grabbed some tools and kit for some cybernetic repairs and a box of ammo. I assumed Reva was bringing her knives, a gun, and anything else that she had pilfered lately. Are you going to be okay for a few days? I asked, dropping my gear by the door and setting down the case with the 50 cal rifle in it more carefully. Fia looked up from her screens and gave me a sneer that looked too much like a wolf's snarl. Bitch, please, I've got everything I need here. Pizza delivers. I raised an eyebrow. Please eat something healthy at least once a day. Where'd that come from? I didn't usually care what she ate. Shit, she was a lycanthrope. The word nutrition meant something very different to her. It was that weird chat with my father. It was in my head. Just don't eat too much junk. She scoffed. And how many iced coffees have you stashed in your bag? Well, consider me dealt with. Reva tossed her own bag down next to mine. All good to go? I nodded, leant down and tousled my sister's hair. Be good. Don't eat anyone. No one but terrorists and Jehovah's Witnesses. She winked. I was about to close the door when she turned back around. Wait, what if Sierra comes calling? I shrugged, nonplussed. Tell her we've ditched the city for a few days to get away from the parasites downstairs. She gave me a thumbs up and settled into a cross-legged position on the floor, pulling on her headphones. We descended to the street via Mrs. Chen's, bags in hand. The car we had been using was still the same ride that we'd scored from Jarrah in the Reaper's Garden. It wasn't the best set of wheels, but it would get us there. I was pretty sure. It might get us there. I'd run a quick diagnostic on it before we'd left the fort down south. It was in serviceable condition, hence why we had kept using it, despite the few bugs. We tossed up an idea of taking a terracoastal train, then whatever transport would be heading in that direction. But I wanted our own reliable set of wheels. It would be a bit slower, but I didn't like the idea of being caught out in the middle of nowhere if the shit hit the fan and we needed to get the fuck out of Dodge. We were looking at a decent chunk of the day in the car, and I wasn't going to let Reva do the whole run. She wanted to start the drive, but I pointed out that I would need the second half of the trip to read up on the files that Fia would send through, so I took the wheel. On the road again, Reva said with a grin as she relaxed back into the passenger seat. She kicked the seat back and put her legs out the window, resting her feet on the wing mirror and closing her eyes. You're going to sleep, while I drive. Rude. She made a shooing motion. Just drive, you'll have your turn. Some travel partner you are, I muttered as I pulled away from the curb. She grinned. Shh, hush, puppy. I drove fast, with the windows down. It was still summer and the warm breeze cut through the car. The aircon was completely shagged anyway. I was pumping 100-year-old techno metal through my inductive hearing implants so as not to wake up Reva. We'd put over 200 Ks behind us, and it was only an hour and a half. Once you blasted out of the outlying areas of the city, there was no cops to give a shit if you were speeding. Red desert sands slowly replaced the scattered bushland that lay past the city limits. I knew that in a few more hours, even that would be replaced with lush, green fields, the result of the nationwide terraforming projects that had turned the red deserts into farmland. I'd never seen the stacks in person, the huge monolithic structures that rose high into the clouds, and not only helped change the weather patterns, but also sifted excess carbon from the atmosphere, somewhat negating the effects of climate change. They couldn't really reverse it, but they had managed to hit pause on it getting any worse. It was an impressive feat, and if I didn't know what the technology had cost, I would have been even more impressed. It was a story that just showed the natural greed of people. Even when the world was at stake, money and power comes first. At the same time, it did give humanity hope that there were still heroes. The technology had come from a small Eastern European country. A research team far ahead of their peers had broken down the boundaries to make it possible. They had pioneered new advances in physics and engineering that weren't even theories 10 years prior. The very thought that the sentient races could control nature on a scale that was a dream that not even the archmages of old could achieve. They found a way to control the very weather patterns without adverse effects to the global weather systems. The fact that they had found out a way to put a stop to climate change at the same time had just been icing on the cake. But instead of sharing it with the world, they held it hostage for as much moolah as they could. What ensued was a bloody war that lasted 5 years and involved most of Europe, not to mention America and Australia. Only the majority of Asia had stayed out due to their own conflicts at the time. They didn't have enough guns to go round. Everyone had a need for this new tech after all, and every world leader knew that whoever held that tech would have the rest of their competitors bowing down. They would pay whatever they had for this power. It hadn't just been a war with boots on the ground either. The other side of the war had been fought in the light-speed realm of the net. Hackers were bought and paid for to topple government systems and fry military ones. It had all been for nothing, though, when a hacker called Fox had beat them to the prize. No one knew who they were or where they had come from, a complete unknown. But man, did they make an impact. They had broken into what was meant to be the most secure data stronghold on the planet, the Void, and leaked the plans for this glorious technology across every possible network they had access to. It was an incredible move of selfless brilliance. In the end, it ended the war and leveled the playing field. It also cost them their life. But that was the way it went. If you wanted to go down in history, you went down in flames, screaming defiance. After that, it didn't take long for every first world country to start a race to see who could finish building the stacks first. It hadn't solved the world's problems, though. They were a costly operation, and the countries that could actually use them couldn't afford them, not without making worse deals with the devil than what the Australian government had with the corps. Some small and desperate countries were basically enslaved to the corporations at this stage. Their very food and water that they worked to produce was held ransom. Generations yet born locked into servitude to make surplus product so that it could be sold for a premium elsewhere. With all this in mind, what they had done for Australia was to make us more independent from the rest of the planet, and Western Australia even more so. We had the most land, we were the most productive, with mines and farms. Sierra had been right. We could almost become autonomous. No one had spoken of breaking away from the rest of the country in over 200 years. It was more effort than it was worth, but the muttering was starting to get about again, thanks in no small part to Sierra herself. After about 3 hours and a few hundred k's behind us, I pulled over at a servo in a blink and you'd miss it town. Reva was still asleep. I left her in the car as I filled it up and went in to buy something to eat. By the time I got back, she had woken up and was stretching the kinks out of her back and the sleep out of her limbs. "I got you a pie," I said, tossing her a paper bag with a beef, cheese and bacon pie. It wasn't the flashiest lunch, but it was all they had that wasn't deep fried. "Thanks." She emptied the whole sachet of sauce onto the top of the pastry and ate it like a trucker. "Well, if that's not sexy, I don't know what is." She scoffed and sculled the bottle of water I gave her. "Girls gotta eat." And so delicately, too. She flipped me off and climbed out of the car to attend to nature. I took my time eating, topping myself up with an iced coffee between every few mouthfuls. It was eerie after so long in the city to be in a place so quiet. Only the odd truck or car passing by. If you squinted, you could just about make out a couple of grey vertical streaks bridging land to sky far and away on the horizon. They really were immense, but we weren't there yet. It was Reva's turn to take the wheel. I needed to do some reading and get some shut-eye. I was feeling more tired than I was letting on. We tore away from the servo, Reva dropping that lead foot of hers and driving like a bat out of hell. Somehow I managed to drift off to sleep with the engine straining under the bonnet in front of us. I hoped she didn't blow us apart. I woke from my nap and the car was still in one piece, winning. Fia had completed her sifting and a ring around. She had been trying to dig up anything that might be dodgy about the area. There was nothing. It's your run-of-the-mill worker town. No one of any note, nothing important. I flicked through the files on my HUD. "There's got to be something," Reba replied, then yawned. "Oh, why else would your buddy come all the way out here?" "Seems like..." I trailed off. "What?" This particular region. Guess who the private backer is?" It was a pointless question to ask her of all people, but she played along. "Do tell." "Sierra. That immortal beauty has her hands in a lot of pies." "Yeah, I guess it's not that surprising though. Most of the big movers and shakers have their hands in this sort of stuff. She certainly fits the type. Oh, and elves aren't immortal." "More immortal than me. You think she knows about Hercule?" I shook my head. He might not even be here for the town. He might just be chasing someone laying low in the area. And I doubt Sierra knows much about what goes on here personally. She probably just signed on the dotted line. Anything past that, she has people to deal with it. I continued to scroll through the useless info. I found a reply from Rio stating that there was no open file concerning Hercule Mason or any jobs in this area. That was interesting. I guess it could have been private and he hadn't logged anything yet, or it could have even been personal. The latter seemed unlikely though. There's another thing, a series of reports lodged by someone with the initials SG, Shane somebody. I shrugged. That's all I've got, but I think he's some sort of work overseer. Anyway, he lodged some reports about raiders hitting the town's supply lines. Raiders? Yeah, bandits, outlaws, just like the good old West. But instead of horses, these guys have cars, and bikes, modded with tech to make an arms dealer jealous. Doesn't anybody do anything about them? Usually they don't strike the same place more than twice. The TAC teams move in and put an end to it, or they hunt them down to the camp with a drone and burn it to the ground with hellfire. That's a vicious tactic. I'm surprised the TAC teams would come this far out. If the raiders are bothering the corpse, well, let's just say money has a larger reach than duty. Maybe we should tell Sierra? Reva suggested. I tilted my head back and forth. I'm already out here. She'd probably just tell me to look into it anyway. I smiled confidently. I'm her favorite hunter, Reva rolled her eyes. Nah, yeah, this will be a nice little surprise for her if we clean up this mess. I stretched out in the chair the same way Reva had when we'd left the city, and threw on a cheap pair of sunnies I'd picked up from the servo. Onwards, to glory. Thank you for listening to Cyphers Edge. Subscribe so as not to miss future episodes. New episodes uploaded every second Saturday. Script and narration by JJ Brandis. Music was provided by Cale McLeish. Copyright JJ Brandis 2025.